Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, stock markets react to President Trump's tariffs. Despite today's tumble, the president says the market will boom, just like a patient will heal after an operation. Iris Tao at the White House. Heads of state are responding to President Trump's new tariffs. Arian Pazdar has which countries are in support and which are already unveiling countermeasures. The Justice Department was back on defense today at another hearing to discuss whether the Trump administration defied an order from a federal judge. That's for not recalling planes deporting more than 200 alleged immigrant gang members to El Salvador. Arlene Richards with key takeaways. Israeli forces have now taken control of the city of Rafah in southern Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel's prime minister travels to Hungary, defying an international arrest warrant. Jason Perry reports. And severe tornadoes from Texas to the northeast have claimed several lives and left tens of thousands without power. Officials warn more tornadoes and heavy rains are still on the way.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. As investors grapple with concerns about new tariffs, U.S. stocks lost around $3 trillion in market value on Thursday, the largest one-day decline in 5 years. But President Trump says the market will boom, just like a patient will heal after an operation. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
I think it's going very well.
Despite stocks plunging on Thursday, President Trump tells us he's optimistic about the market and the country.
It was an operation, like when a patient gets operated on. The markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, the country is going to boom. And the rest of the world wants to see, is there any way they can make a deal?
The Dow fell over 1,600 points on Thursday as all three major market indexes posted their worst day since 2020. Companies with production lines in countries like China are hit the hardest, with Apple losing around $300 billion or over 9% of its market value. The sell-off comes after Trump announced on Wednesday a 10% baseline tariff on all countries and higher reciprocal tariffs on countries he says are treating the U.S. especially unfairly in trade.
They do it to us and we do it to them.
And while some are warning of higher prices,
because of the crippling Trump tariff tax.
The White House press secretary says the president will bring down the cost of living through
massive deregulation, an energy boom, and tax cuts.
And as some farmers are expected to be impacted by tariffs, the agriculture secretary promises relief.
We are setting up the infrastructure that if in fact we have some economic consequences in the short term to our farmers and perhaps our ranchers, that we will have programs in place to solve for that.
Trump's new 25% tariffs on foreign-made cars and parts also went into effect on Thursday. The White House touting reactions by some automakers, Ford offering American buyers discount pricing, General Motors increasing truck production in Indiana, and Stellantis now pausing production at some of its Canadian and Mexican plants. And all this happening as companies are adjusting to President Trump's new tariffs aimed at bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Countries around the world are responding to President Trump's new tariffs. Some say they're happy, while others are already preparing countermeasures. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has details on how different countries are reacting.
Canada's Prime Minister on Thursday, responding to the tariffs announced by President Trump. Prime Minister Mark Carney is announcing a tariff on American vehicles.
I'm announcing that the Government of Canada will be responding by matching the U.S. approach, with 25% tariffs on all vehicles imported from the United States that are not compliant with CUSMA, our North American Free Trade Agreement.
Carney also says the new tariffs won't apply to auto parts and won't affect vehicle content from Mexico. He previously announced that retaliatory tariffs will remain in effect. Carney also says that Canada will fight the U.S. tariffs until they're lifted. Mexico, meanwhile, celebrating that it's being excluded from the new general tariffs. Mexico's president also expresses satisfaction that the North American Free Trade Agreement will remain in force.
My understanding is that there wouldn't be tariffs on Mexico because Mexico doesn't place tariffs on the United States. There are no additional tariffs, not even for Canada, although in the case of Canada, there are a few in some specific areas.
The Trump administration is keeping the tariffs it imposed on Mexico earlier this year. Those are being tied to Mexico tackling security issues, such as illegal fentanyl trafficking. And Argentina's government is also expressing satisfaction with Trump's decision to impose lower tariffs on goods from Argentina.
President Milei said he was satisfied with having achieved the cheapest rates. We know about the excellent relationship we have with the United States. Our objective is to sign a free trade agreement.
China, however, is urging the U.S. to cancel its latest tariffs immediately. The Chinese regime is threatening retaliation if the U.S. doesn't lift the tariffs. And the European Union saying this on Thursday.
We are already finalizing the first package of countermeasures in response to tariffs on steel. And we're now preparing for further countermeasures.
And France, which is part of the EU, says the new tariffs will mostly affect the American economy.
The American economy and the American people will come out of this weaker and poorer than yesterday.
But while announcing possible countermeasures, the European Commission president added that she does agree with President Trump that some countries have been using trade rules to take unfair advantage of the U.S. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Britain will not immediately retaliate on President Trump's tariffs, seeking first to consult with UK businesses amid a push for a trade deal. But the Prime Minister says all options remain on the table. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more from London.
The British government has drawn up a list of thousands of US products that could be slapped with import taxes in retaliation to President Trump's tariffs. Ministers have said they will keep working towards a trade deal with the US, but Prime Minister Keir Starmer stressed that nothing is off the table in terms of a response.
But we must act in the national interest. A trade war is in nobody's interest, in my view. But of course, we have to protect ourselves, and that's why we're keeping all options on the table.
It comes after Trump on Tuesday announced a 10% reciprocal tariff on Britain. This is the baseline level tariff imposed on all countries, which also means the UK avoided a heavier hit, like the 20% on the European Union. That said, it is still expected to impact British businesses. Scotch whisky from Scotland will be hit, as will British-made Rolls-Royce aircraft engines.
We have a range of levers at our disposal, and we will continue our work with businesses across the country to discuss their assessment of the options.
Britain on Wednesday published a 400-page list of US goods it could include in any possible retaliatory tariff response. The list includes everything from binoculars and bourbon whiskey to automotive parts and cheese. It also includes gas, diesel and electric passenger vehicles and food products including meat and fish. The British government stressed that not all goods on the list would be subject to any future tariffs. British Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds said his priority was to reach a deal with the US.
However, we do reserve the right to take any action we deem necessary if a deal is not secured.
He said the list is now subject to a 4-week consultation with businesses. If a trade deal with the US is agreed to, Reynolds said the consultation would be paused and any retaliatory measures would be reversed. British trade expert Stephen Smith said the UK got off better than it feared.
The US is approaching this as a goods trade problem. It's measured its trade relationships with its trading partners solely in terms of goods. And one of the consequences of that, of course, is that the US hasn't calculated the balance in its trade relationships in a way that integrates services trade. And if you did that, this picture would look very different.
Britain had argued it should not be hit by Trump's tariffs because trade flows between the two countries are broadly in balance and British exports were mostly in services. The UK exported nearly $80 billion of goods to the US in 2023, around 15% of all its goods exports. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
And how are everyday Americans reacting to the news? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people.
So President Trump issued a round of global tariffs. The world's reacting, the market's reacting. How are you guys reacting to it?
Well, I think it'll be good because NATO and all the other countries been taking advantage of the United States for years, and they've been getting away with it. and I think it's time to put a stop to it.
I think this is kind of Trump's exit from the global stage, and I think it's going to set us up for austerity measures that are going to lead to problems you see in other countries.
I believe that our national deficit is a detriment in the long term. Look at Detroit. I mean, it was amazing, and now it's, almost down to zero. How many cars are made here? Not many.
People need to be able to buy their groceries every day and need to be able to buy produce and meats and be able to feed their kids. So I don't think it's the way to go.
Certainly this country was based on tariffs back before income taxes were placed on us. But I think for the first time, maybe since the GI Bill, the working class is going to really benefit from this.
Back in the, 1920s, we didn't have taxation on our people. Now that tariffs are put in place, I do believe my children will be able to live part of their life no taxes.
So President Trump said the main objective of this round of tariffs is to onshore investments and bring manufacturing back home to the United States. And the caveat is there's going to be short-term pain. I guess the question here would be, are you willing to buy the bullet, at least for now?
Absolutely. It would be nice to bring some manufacturing back because we've lost so much over the past decades.
We've been biting the bullet for the last 4 years, so we can bite it a little bit longer.
It doesn't happen overnight. As most people would tell you, to build the infrastructure, it takes a decade, half a decade even to get started with something like that. Never mind the labor costs in the U.S. will never really allow manufacturing to compete on a global level.
Oh, for short term, absolutely. And I have no problem in general with reciprocal tariffs. Yeah, I think if we knew exactly when things will even out, I'd be more comfortable with it. But for right now, we don't know what short term really means.
Anything worth anything, marriage, love, cement flooring, monuments, anything, you got to put the pain and the effort in. But you get the long-term benefit, and it's permanent.
Well, I certainly am, but we seem to be a pretty impatient people. All good things take a little time, and all growth has a little pain.
K through 12 schools that want federal money have 10 days to show the Education Department that they are following federal civil rights laws. Specifically, they'll have to certify that they've eliminated diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. Acting Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights Craig Traynor explained, saying, quote, federal financial assistance is a privilege, not a right. Traynor added that a number of schools were using DEI programs to discriminate against certain groups. The certification asks state and school leaders to acknowledge that their federal money is conditioned on compliance with civil rights laws. Schools and states that engage in illegal DEI practices could lose grants and contracts. K through 12 institutions could also be held liable under the False Claims Act for defrauding government programs. A federal judge continues to express skepticism over whether the Trump administration defied his order to recall planes deporting more than 200 alleged immigrant gang members to El Salvador. NTD's legal correspondent Arlene Richards has details from an afternoon hearing where the judge suggested the Trump administration had acted irresponsibly.
At a hearing on Thursday, federal judge James Boasberg said the Justice Department acted in bad faith on March 15th by attempting to quickly deport illegal immigrants to El Salvador. The DOJ claimed that the administration complied with the judge's order. But Boasberg said, quote, it seems to me there is a fair likelihood that that is not correct. This isn't the first time that Boasberg has required the department to respond to his questions about whether it defied his order. On March 15th, Boasberg issued an emergency restraining order to block the Trump administration from deporting suspected Venezuelan gang members to an El Salvador prison under the Alien Enemies Act. In the days that followed, Boasberg requested flight information for each plane, including takeoff and landing time, as well as information on when Trump published his proclamation that invoked the act. The department contends that at the time of the written order, 3 airplanes carrying the immigrants had already left U.S. airspace. Boasberg had first given a verbal order to turn the planes around. The department's attorney declined to answer on Thursday when the judge asked him if he communicated the verbal directive to Trump officials, citing the attorney-client privilege. Boasberg said, in fact, the government acted in bad faith throughout that day. You really believed everything you did that day was legal and could survive a court challenge. I can't believe you ever would have operated in the way you did. In prior weeks, the DOJ refused to reveal any further information about those flights by invoking the state secrets privilege, which protects national security concerns. The case, filed by 5 Venezuelan immigrants held at a Texas facility, seems to present the most consequential face-off between executive and judicial branches as the administration faces a flood of lawsuits. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has submitted a filing to the Supreme Court asking it to get rid of the restraining order. They're also asking the highest court to block the district court from issuing any further restraining orders. Trump believes he has the proper executive power to deport suspected dangerous criminals with close ties to the Venezuelan government. Meanwhile, Boasberg is considering what consequences the Trump administration should face if he decides that it willfully violated his March 15th order. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
The Defense Department announced it will review Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's use of Signal while discussing last month's military strikes in Yemen. Acting Inspector General Stephen Stebbins wrote a letter to Hegseth saying the goal of this investigation will be to determine if Hegseth and others complied with protocol while using the commercial messaging app. This probe will also look into whether Hegseth was in line with classification requirements. Top officials previously said the information shared in those messages was not classified. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu traveled to Hungary, defying an international warrant for his arrest. The International Criminal Court accuses Netanyahu of being responsible for alleged war crimes in the Gaza Strip. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu traveled to Hungary on Thursday, where he was greeted by Prime Minister Viktor Orban. This was only Netanyahu's second trip abroad since the International Criminal Court, or ICC, issued a warrant for his arrest. They accuse him of being responsible for alleged war crimes committed in the Gaza Strip. And under the current rules of the ICC, the government of Hungary was supposed to arrest Netanyahu upon his arrival. However, Orban said Hungary was leaving the ICC.
The reason is it has become our conviction that it has become a political court. So in recent years, it has become not a neutral legal court, but a political court. And this was most clearly shown by the decisions regarding Israel.
And Netanyahu thanked Orban for leaving the ICC, making Hungary the first country in the European Union to do so.
You've just taken a bold and principled position on the ICC, and I thank you, Victor. This is not only important for us, it's important for all democracies. The ICC directs its actions against us, fighting a just war with just means, and of course not against our tormentors.
In a statement, the ICC presidency expressed concern about Hungary's decision and urged it to stay committed to the ICC's founding agreement. Meanwhile, in the war in the Gaza Strip, Israeli forces have now taken over Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip. On Thursday, hundreds of thousands of residents fled from the city, many of whom ended up in nearby Khan Yunis.
I am telling you, I was packing my belongings with the plane hovering over our heads. Until when will this continue? Until when?
But even Khan Yunis isn't free from Israeli airstrikes. Residents were seen inspecting the aftermath of an Israeli airstrike that hit an area filled with tents.
Why is Netanyahu expanding the operation? What is the operation he is expanding?
And it appears that residents in the Gaza Strip continue to ask how long the war will continue and why it's happening, without mentioning the hostages that are still being held in the Gaza Strip. And that is what Israeli officials continue to repeat as the reason for the operations. Might the residents be afraid to mention the hostages because of possible retaliation from Hamas? According to a post on X from the official account from the State of Israel, a 22-year-old Palestinian man who recently participated in the protest in Gaza was tortured and killed, and his body was left at his family's doorstep. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Widespread devastation after a deadly tornado tore through parts of the South and Midwest yesterday. But the danger isn't over, with more severe weather on the way and potential historic flooding now expected in several areas. NTD's Christina Corona has the latest.
At least 7 people have lost their lives due to the storm that tore through the U.S. on Wednesday, including 5 in Tennessee, 1 in Missouri, and 1 in Indiana. 13 others were injured. At least 19 tornadoes tore through communities, destroying structures, overturned vehicles, and downed trees. The National Weather Service confirmed that tornadoes in Lake City, Arkansas, and Selmer, Tennessee, on Wednesday night and early Thursday were at least EF3s. The Selmer tornado had winds of 160 miles per hour, while the Lake City tornado reached 150 miles per hour. Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves provided an update during a press conference Thursday, reporting that 6 people were injured due to the severe weather that hit the state the previous night. There have been no fatalities reported.
Damage assessments are currently underway. At this time, at least 60 homes have received damage across 5 counties.
Benton, Bolivar, Marshall, Tate, and Tippah counties were affected.
The Mississippi Emergency Management Management Agency is in contact with local emergency managers and is in the process of filling requests for tarps, water, and food for impacted counties.
The storms also knocked out power to hundreds of thousands of residents, leaving over 213,000 customers across 8 states, including Indiana, Ohio, Texas, Kentucky, Arkansas, Tennessee, Missouri, and Mississippi without power early Thursday. As the storm system continues, Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, and Mississippi are bracing for a potentially historic generational flood event. Forecasters warn that some areas could see up to 15 inches of rain through the weekend, leading to possible river flooding. Some areas will see warnings for more tornadoes, hail, and life-threatening flooding. According to the Storm Prediction Center, a level 4 out of 5 risk of severe thunderstorms are in effect for parts of northeastern Texas, southeastern Oklahoma, and much of Arkansas on Friday. A tornado watch is currently in effect for over 5 million people across Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Arkansas, lasting until 10 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Coming up, the U.S. wants NATO allies to step up their defense spending. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the newly confirmed U.S. ambassador to NATO met in Brussels today with NATO foreign ministers. Jack Bradley reports. David Perdue, Trump's pick to be next ambassador to China, faces a confirmation hearing the day after the heaviest tariffs were levied on the U.S. adversary. Luis Martinez reports. And a report says that DOGE accounts for a big chunk of March U.S. job cuts. Plus, the department announces the cancellation of a pricey contract at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Jason Blair reports from D.C. after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Brussels with a newly confirmed NATO ambassador. They're calling on allies to spend more on defense. That says President Trump has a track record of pushing these allies to contribute more. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
Events of the last few years, a full-scale ground war in the heart of Europe, is a reminder that hard power is still necessary as a deterrent.
The U.S. wants NATO allies to step up their defense spending.
This is a collection not just of partners and allies, but of advanced economies, of rich countries who have the capability to do more.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio and newly confirmed U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Matt Whitaker, were meeting NATO foreign ministers in Brussels on Thursday. Whitaker was confirmed in a 52-45 vote on Tuesday, and upon his confirmation, he affirmed an ironclad relationship with NATO, rebuilding Ukraine, taking seriously the threat from the Chinese regime, and having allies pay their fair share. The U.S. is pushing its allies to increase their defense spending to 5% of their GDP. As of now, no single NATO member meets that requirement, but Rubio says that he doesn't expect them to do this right away or even in the next couple of years. But they need to make progress toward this goal. The current requirement is at 2% of their GDP. As of now, 23 of the 32 members meet this benchmark. Italy and Spain, who have sizable economies, were among those who did not meet this target. But many allies in Brussels showing support for increasing their spending to the alliance.
The current levels of our defense expenditure are too low.
That we are going to increase our spendings for defense from the next year up to 5% at least.
But NATO will have to be fairer, and that means that we will have to increase spending.
It's now very much time also for Europe to take care of its own homework.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has also been supportive of increased spending.
We know that the United States is a staunch ally in NATO, but that commitment comes with an expectation. And the expectation is that the European allies and Canada need to spend more.
Rutte also praised the Trump administration for making progress on ending the Russia-Ukraine war.
President Trump, the team, you broke the deadlock. You started a process of negotiations, with our full support to bring the Ukraine war to a lasting, to a durable peace.
He also said that the Chinese Communist Party is closely watching the outcome of this war.
And ultimately there is an audience of one which will be judging the outcome of this war. And that is the first Secretary of the Communist Party of China, Mr. Xi Jinping. And he will be watching who comes out on top.
Secretary Rubio meeting with Indo-Pacific partners on Thursday on the sidelines of this NATO meeting as they agreed to stand up to China's aggression and unfair trade policies. The top diplomats will conclude their meeting on Friday, where they're looking to help move the ball for U.S. security plans in Ukraine and more broadly Europe. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The Senate Foreign Relations Committee held its confirmation hearing for David Perdue to be the next ambassador to China. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on the story.
Marxist nationalism is reshaping China, and their global ambitions threaten the current world order. Put simply, they want a world order more in line with their authoritarian principles.
David Perdue, a former senator from the state of Ohio, gave testimony before lawmakers he served with. Despite niceties, Democrats immediately pressed Senator Perdue on the Trump administration's policy towards U.S. allies vis-a-vis China.
Leadership is questioned in the world by our allies and those we have stood alongside. I think by the same logic, Xi will inevitably be emboldened to believe that he can take on his vision to reacquire Taiwan, the Philippines, the South China Sea.
Withdrawal is not an option for the United States. I don't think President Trump is attempting to do that. I think by reaching and stepping forward in the area of trade addresses some of the questions that you bring up there. Our allies, we have to align and make sure they understand the threat and develop a cohesive strategy.
Senator Rick Scott, the Republican from Florida, highlighted the human rights abuses of the CCP and in particular the persecution of religious groups internationally, including Falun Gong practitioners.
So the Communist Party sends fentanyl into the United States, killed 78,000 people last year. They treat the Uyghurs horribly. They don't follow any trade rules. They never comply with the WTO. It's a despicable government.
Our support of China over the last 30 years or more, also the violations in the World Trade Organization we've turned a blind eye to, those days are over, I believe, and I think we've got to stand up.
Senator Scott pressed Senator Perdue on the impact of U.S. tariffs on China and the economic relations in between both countries.
But if we stop buying their stuff, what will happen?
Well, if foreign capital from the U.S. stops going into China, they have a real problem.
If we stop buying their product, what will happen?
Well,
the American public says enough's enough. What will happen to their economy?
It'll collapse.
Right. Thank you.
Senator Perdue served one term in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and in the Senate Armed Services Committee. He was endorsed by President Trump back in 2021 when he attempted to become the next governor of Georgia, and he's expected to be confirmed by the Senate to be the next U.S. ambassador to China in the coming week. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
A new report says that recommendations from the Department of Government Efficiency have resulted in almost 80% of the job cuts that took place last month. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the DOGE update from Washington, D.C.
According to a new report, there were just over 275,000 reported job cuts to the U.S. workforce in March, an estimated 79% of which came as a result of DOGE recommendations. The March cuts represent a 60% increase over February and are the highest since the spring of 2020. The report is from Challenger, Gray & Christmas, a global outplacement and business executive coaching firm. The report says that DOGE's recommendations in the past 2 months led to over 280,000 planned layoffs over 27 agencies, plus 4,500 more resulting from cutting federal aid and contracts. And DOGE also announced it has uncovered a Veterans Affairs contract worth $380,000 a month for, quote, minor website modifications. The department canceled the contract, saying the duties were transferred to an internal software engineer who spends 10 hours a week on the work. And finally, 5 disability rights groups are suing DOGE, the Social Security Administration, and Elon Musk over recent layoffs. The groups say the job cuts are unconstitutional and harm people who have disabilities. The Social Security Administration sends checks to about 73 million retired and disabled Americans each month. According to the lawsuit, the plaintiffs are individuals with disabilities who depend on Social Security benefits to meet their, quote, most basic and essential needs. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Coming up, a member of the West Virginia House of Delegates joins us to discuss the state's ban on 7 synthetic dyes into preservatives in all food and beverages, why the state is taking the lead on the Make America Healthy Again agenda. Stay tuned for that after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. In the most extensive law of its kind, West Virginia has banned 7 synthetic dyes into preservatives in all food and beverages sold in the state. It's the first state to do so. The governor signed the measure into law last week. Joining us now to discuss the state's efforts is Evan Worrell, a member of the West Virginia House of Delegates. He's also the chair of the state legislature's Health and Human Resources Committee. Evan, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you. Now, with West Virginia banning food dyes effective this August in schools and statewide in 2028, how will this work? Do you expect companies to make one version of their product for West Virginia and other states with similar bans and one with food dyes for the rest of the states?
Yeah. So, Tiffany, thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it. So, we looked at this, the way we look at this happening is in other countries right now, these same manufacturers have reformulated their products currently. So they know how to do this already. And so what we saw is that, we have some of the poorest health outcomes in the country, and we want to help make West Virginia healthier. And this is one of the first small steps the initiative to take. And it really became apparent that through there was a documentary called To Die For, and my wife, being a MAHA mom, has really taken dyes out of our homes. And so we started looking at this deeper, and there's a big study done in 2021 that shows a lot of the problems with these dyes and some of these preservatives. And so, thankfully, I had a cohort of legislators that walked in with me this session, and we said we were going to look to remove these dyes from our school system at first. And then, like you said, in 2028, from the state banning them completely. But we expect the FDA and even the manufacturers to do the right thing and just reformulate their products already. We're seeing a lot of legislation in other states doing the same thing.
And Evan, these 7 food dyes and 2 preservatives, talk to us about what common foods they're found in and the health concerns tied to them.
Yeah, so one of the biggest things we talk about here in West Virginia is Mountain Dew would be one, right? So, and then pepperoni rolls. But let's be real. Mountain Dew, for example, is sold in the European Union with beta carotene instead of yellow 5. And then additionally, there's a preservative called BHA out there that has shown carcinogenic effects. But you can use things like rosemary extract that keeps, meat, for example, from going rancid. So once again, these same products are sold in Canada and other countries currently without these synthetic food dyes, without these preservatives. So, I don't look at it as taking any products off the shelf. It's just making sure those ingredients are not being put in our food.
Now, the governor also signed the first letter of intent to no longer include soda as an entitlement under the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. In your view, how likely are other states to follow this move?
Well, I think a lot will. And as you've seen with the new USDA Secretary, Brooke Rollins, I know she's made multiple comments about this as well. And, once again, this is something we think is just the right move to do. We're not trying to take food away from people, but, it's called the Nutrition Assistance Program, right? And I would argue that soda and junk food, for example, may not be very nutritious. And, there's ultimately other things we need to do in the state as well to help, people that are on SNAP or in food deserts. We need to help them get to the local, farmers markets, be able to purchase items as well that are healthier. But I do see this as an opportunity, statewide, and of course across the country, to remove these options. One of the things I do think about with the Nutrition Assistance Program is that, they're doing this with taxpayer money. And as a citizen and many citizens across our state, we don't have a choice of those tax dollars being taken from us to be provided for these, for junk food and soda. I just think it's a good step to help it, but we got to make sure we're educating our citizens as well to ensure that they have the opportunities to choose healthier items.
Now, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been pushing the Make America Healthy Again, or MAHA movement. Yeah. He's actually praised West Virginia for prioritizing health policy and embracing the MAHA agenda. Why is West Virginia putting such an emphasis on this issue?
Yeah, so I'll be real honest. This is my 7th year in the House of Delegates in West Virginia, but my first year as a House Health Chair. And as soon as I heard about RFK Jr. and I started studying him last year, of course, when he was running for president and the things that he was looking towards, I kind of premised that with our governor after the election and said, hey, Mr. Governor, I think this is something we can do in West Virginia. We have poor health outcomes. We have a small population, so we can see measured success and measured outcomes happen quickly. We just need to kind of jump on that train and go down that MAHA movement. And once again, I think about my wife and other legislators' wives who I would consider MAHA moms who are already making these decisions in our homes and really bringing this to light. And I think it's extremely important that we move the needle here. We have to do some things, incremental steps to move the needle to improve our health outcomes in West Virginia.
Now, speaking of health more broadly, the CDC says the U.S. has an obesity crisis, with more than 2 in 5 U.S. adults having it, which can lead to serious health risks like heart disease. It is an issue across the country. Do you think there's enough bipartisan support for the MAHA agenda across the country? Can implementing it reduce obesity?
So I believe so, and this isn't a partisan issue. We ultimately want our citizens to be healthier, and I think it starts with the younger generation, though. So when we look at the school systems and the food we're delivering them, and also the lack of access to physical education or recess. Tiffany, you might remember back in the day there was a presidential fitness test. I remember that being in school, and I think it's important that we get back to those standards and doing certain things and just educating the next generation so that as they grow older, we hope that they would make improved health decisions as they become adults. And that's ultimately, I think, how we improve healthcare outcomes. It's about prevention and education for our current school students.
Important topic for sure. Evan Worrell, thank you so much for joining us.
Tiffany, thank you.
Coming up in the NHL, another goal for Alex Ovechkin, who's now just 3 away from history. Dave Martin joins us to discuss. And Rome's Trevi fountain hides a secret. An underground system drives the waterworks at the iconic tourist attraction. More on that after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer now for your sports news. We're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start in the NHL as Washington's Alex Ovechkin scored again last night to move him within 3 goals of Wayne Gretzky's record. How many games are left in the season?
Yeah, he's got 7 games left this season to set the record. Now, the next game for the Capitals is tomorrow night as Washington hosts Chicago then. His goal last night was actually the team's only one in a 5-1 loss. That was actually their 4th loss in the last 5 games for the Capitals. They're still actually leading the Eastern Conference, though, but they're really wobbling right now. But anyway, for the season, that was his 39th goal, which now ties him for 3rd in the NHL, which is incredible given that he's missed like a quarter of the season with injuries, and he's 39 years old. But anyway, history is going to be made very soon here. He should get to this 895 before the end of the season at the rate he's going.
Well, shifting gears to baseball, some sad news recently as the 14-year-old son of former player Brett Gardner mysteriously passed away while on a family vacation in Costa Rica. What's the latest on this?
Yeah, authorities have blamed the cause of death on carbon monoxide poisoning after tests showed high amounts of carboxyhemoglobin levels in his system. Now, this is Miller Gardner, the Brett Gardner's son, passed away back on March 21st while staying with his family at a hotel in Costa Rica. There was a lot of mystery, of course, about how it actually happened. Originally, it was announced several members of the family had fallen ill after going out to eat. They were treated by the hotel doctor. They thought maybe it was food poison. They also checked out the possibility of asphyxiation, too. In any case, a room adjacent to where they were staying was some kind of machine room. They believe there was some kind of contamination from that. Now, his father, Brett Gardner, played 14 years in the major leagues, all for the New York Yankees. He won a World Series title with them, was an all-star, was a Gold Glove player. So, very sad case here.
Well, in some lighter news, looking now at women's college basketball, USC All-American Juju Watkins was named the AP's Player of the Year today, becoming the 4th sophomore ever to win the award.
Yeah, and it wasn't even really a huge surprise or an upset that she won the award. She was 4th in the NCAA in scoring 24 points a game. She led USC to a Big Ten title. That was her first conference title in years. In fact, this was the most wins they've had since sometime in the 1980s, 31-4 this year. They were #1 seed in the NCAA tournament. That's unfortunately where Watkins injured her knee in just the second round there. They won a couple of games without her, but ultimately lost to UConn in the Elite Eight. Now, they actually beat UConn earlier this season, 72-70. Watkins was the highest scorer in that game, so they surely missed her there. But in any case, UConn will now play UCLA tomorrow night in the women's Final Four.
Looking at tonight's sports schedule, just 2 baseball games on this evening. But in the NBA, we have a possible first-round playoff matchup out in LA.
Yeah, Lakers versus Warriors tonight. Now, right now, the Lakers and Nuggets are tied for the 3rd, while the Warriors are in 5th. But the 4 seed plays the 5 seed in the first round of the NBA playoffs, so that's very possible there. Warriors are playing very well right now. They're 19-5 since they acquired Jimmy Butler about 2 months ago. Meanwhile, LA, they're kind of wobbling too here. They've lost 8 of the last 14 games. But you've got 3 of the NBA's biggest stars there on the court tonight. You've got LeBron James, Luka Doncic, and Steph Curry. Baseball, we've only got those 2 games tonight, as you mentioned, but one of them has the New York Yankees, and of course, their torpedo bats are all the rage right now. And it's going to continue to happen until they either stop hitting home runs or everybody else gets the torpedo bats as well. But they really haven't stopped homering. They hit another one last night. They've got 19 now in 5 games, so that puts them on pace to like double the record for most home runs by a team. But it's a very long season, so we won't know that until October.
A lot of months still ahead. Davis, always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
One of Rome's most iconic landmarks is hiding something. An underground chamber beneath the Italian capital houses centuries-old infrastructure and modern technology. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the details.
The Trevi fountain is one of Rome's most recognizable landmarks and a major draw for visitors from around the world. What tourists don't see is the carefully managed system of waterworks below. Davide De Alonso oversees the team that manages the fountain.
We are inside the decantation room of the Trevi fountain. This basin, also known as a distribution tank, served exclusively to decant water to supply the richest families in the area. There was a distribution system of lead pipes that served the rich, very rich, and less rich families. Based on the diameter of the pipes at the outlet, one could tell the importance of the family.
A large hand-drawn register still hangs on the wall. It lists the handwritten names of the families served by the fountain. Back then, technicians could turn off the water if a bill was overdue. Marco Tasson describes the old system.
These are wooden plugs that were used in antiquity to cap fountain basins. Some think that they were also used to cap the ancient counter, the old calibrated mouths, in the event when the user was in arrears.
While the history of this fountain has been preserved, the system itself has evolved. Today, water no longer flows freely from the aqueduct. Instead, 2 electric pumps recycle 33 gallons of water per second.
The Trevi fountain always operated with direct water from the Acqua Virgo until the early 1950s, when people began to think that perhaps saving water was essential, and the first recirculating pumps were installed.
Before being recirculated, the water is treated. This helps preserve the marble and ensure the fountain remains clean and clear.
We have a complex water treatment system with a softener that essentially removes limescale from the water, followed by a reverse osmosis system that makes the water free of mineral salts. All this aims to make the water as neutral as possible. Operation is fully automated by multi-parametric control units and algorithms that work to ensure that the fountain functions properly.
The entire operation is monitored automatically using sensors and algorithms to keep the system balanced. Flow is adjusted to maintain steady pressure.
The water that passes through the fountain is actually always the same. Because we are talking about a recirculation system, so the same water is sucked back into a channel and recirculated. The water level in the tank is monitored, and for example, with higher temperatures, the water obviously tends to evaporate. The automatic system tends to replenish the water, taking it from the aqueduct and then restarting the treatment process.
The new system keeps the fountain flowing for millions of tourists who visit the Eternal City each year. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.